March 11th, 1995. 8 sheep lay dead on a quiet Puerto Rican farm. No savage wounds, no signs of struggle, just small, precise puncture marks on each neck and bodies completely drained of blood. This wasn't just another predator attack. This was the beginning of a wave of mysterious deaths that would spread across 2 continents, baffle scientists, and give birth to one of the most terrifying cryptids in modern history. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, and today we're entering the hunting grounds of El Chupacabra. If you ask most people about cryptids, they'll probably mention Bigfoot lurking in the Pacific Northwest, or Nessie swimming in her Scottish loch. But there's one creature that's different. One that didn't slowly emerge from centuries of folklore or ancient tribal legends. This one burst onto the scene in our lifetime, leaving behind not just stories, but bodies. Real physical evidence that something was hunting in the night. Most monster stories follow a pattern. A glimpse in the woods, shadow in the water, maybe some questionable footprints. But El Chupacabra flipped the script. It announced itself with a body count, and not just in some remote wilderness. These attacks happen in people's backyards, in their barns, right outside their bedroom windows. What makes this case so fascinating is how quickly it spread. Not the usual decades or centuries. In less than a year, this thing went from a local Puerto Rican oddity to an international phenomenon. Farmers were finding bloodless animal corpses from Miami to Mexico City. And unlike most cryptid cases where descriptions vary wildly, the witnesses all described the same distinctive features: the spikes along its back, those penetrating red eyes, the way it moved on 2 legs like some kind of demonic kangaroo. And the Chupacabra didn't just cross geographical boundaries. It started showing up in scientific journals. Veterinarians were documenting wounds they couldn't explain. Wildlife experts were finding tracks that didn't match any known predator. And for the first time in cryptid history, we had DNA evidence. Now, what that DNA told us, well, that's where this story takes a sharp turn into territory that even hardened skeptics find hard to dismiss. So get comfortable, because we're about to deep dive into a mystery that's still unfolding. And unlike those age-old legends of Bigfoot or the Jersey Devil, this one comes with something those stories never had: proof. In early 1995, Puerto Rico was about to become ground zero for one of the most compelling cryptid phenomena of the modern age. But the story of blood-drained livestock didn't start there. Not even close. Going back to the 1970s, farmers across America's heartland were finding their cattle mutilated in ways that defied explanation. Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Colorado. Reports kept streaming in of animals found with organs surgically removed, but their bodies completely drained of blood. But those cases would pale in comparison to what was coming. Let's get back to Puerto Rico, March 1995. 8 sheep found dead on a single farm. No signs of a struggle, just small, precise puncture wounds and bodies that looked deflated. Within months, the body count would climb into the hundreds. Farmers were finding everything from chickens to cattle drained completely dry, like someone had hooked them up to some kind of vampiric vacuum cleaner. The real game changer came in September of that year. Madeline Tolentino, a housewife in Canovanas, was looking out her window when she saw something that would define the Chupacabra image for decades to come. According to her, this wasn't some mangy coyote or wild dog. What she described was straight out of a sci-fi nightmare. A bipedal creature standing 3 to 4 foot tall, with huge red eyes that wrapped toward its temples, spikes running down its back, and skin that looked almost alien. Now, skeptics love to point out that Tolentino had recently seen the movie Species before her sighting. Yeah, there are some similarities between her description and the film's alien design. But here's the thing. She wasn't describing something she saw in the dark at 100 yards. This thing walked right past her window and down her street in broad daylight. The media couldn't get enough of it. UFO researcher Jorge Martin worked with Tolentino to create that now iconic sketch, the one that would spread like wildfire across the early internet and turn El Chupacabra into a global sensation. But what makes this case different from your typical cryptid story is what happened next. Instead of just fading into urban legend territory, the attacks spread. Miami, Mexico City, Chile, everywhere the legend traveled, bloodless bodies followed. We're not talking about a handful of cases. By the end of 1995, over 1,000 animals had been killed in Puerto Rico alone. Police were escorting kids to school. Farmers were sleeping in their barns with loaded shotguns. The governor had to make a public statement trying to calm the panic. But perhaps the strangest part of this whole origin story is how consistent the early descriptions were. Usually with cryptid sightings, everyone sees something different. But in those first months, before the media circus really took hold, witnesses from different parts of the island who had no contact with each other were describing the same distinctive features. Those red eyes, the spikes, the weird way it moved on two legs. Some say it was mass hysteria. Others point to secret government experiments gone wrong. But one thing's for sure, whatever started in Puerto Rico that spring didn't stay there. And unlike most monster stories that get handed down through generations, this one was born in our lifetime, documented in real time, and left behind a trail of very real bodies that science still struggles to explain. Let's look at what happened after those first sheep were found. Puerto Rico in 1995 was about to experience something that would make the X-Files look tame. Within weeks of the initial attacks, the death toll started climbing fast. We're not talking about random predator attacks here. These killings followed a pattern so precise that it made investigators' skin crawl. First, there was the surgical precision. Every single victim had the same distinctive marks, 2 clean puncture wounds, usually on the neck, no torn flesh, no signs of a struggle, just those haunting little holes, like someone had used a demonic juice box straw. The bodies weren't eaten, not even a nibble. They were just empty, completely drained of blood. And I mean completely. When veterinarians performed necropsies, which is just an autopsy on an animal, they found something that defied explanation. The animal's circulatory system were bone dry, like something had literally vacuumed out every last drop. By May of that year, farmers were losing sleep and livestock at an alarming rate. Goats, chickens, rabbits, and even dogs weren't safe. The killings would happen in the dead of night, silent as a shadow. The only warning? The eerie silence of farm animals that would normally raise hell if a predator was nearby. Local authorities tried to play it cool at first. Yeah, right. That lasted about as long as it took for the body count to hit triple digits. Police started getting calls every single night. Some nights, they'd find 3, 4, even 5 farms hit in the same area. Always the same story. Puncture wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. They even went so far as to organize search teams, led by local police, armed with everything from shotguns to infrared cameras. The mayor of Canovanas, Jose Quimo Soto, even led some of these expeditions himself. Picture that, an elected official trading his suit for camo gear to hunt a blood-drinking monster. But no matter how many people were looking, no matter how much firepower they had, they always seemed to be one step behind. They'd hear about an attack, rush to the scene, and find nothing but those telltale puncture wounds and drained corpses. It's like this thing was taunting them. The panic spread faster than the attacks. Parents stopped letting their kids play outside after dark. Some people even hung crosses over their animals' pens, calling for any kind of protection they could get. The experts were stumped. Wildlife officials insisted it had to be some kind of known predator. But when pressed to explain how a normal animal could drain bodies completely of blood without spilling a drop, or how it could kill multiple animals in different locations on the same night, well, let's just say their theories started sounding as far-fetched as the monster stories. By the time August rolled around, the situation had gotten so bad that the Puerto Rican government couldn't ignore it anymore. The Department of Agriculture launched an official investigation. Unfortunately, their official report raised more questions than it answered. They confirmed the unusual nature of the wounds and the complete blood loss, but couldn't provide any explanation that made sense. The media coverage exploded. Local newspapers started running daily Chupacabra watch sections. TV crews from the US mainland flew in. Even international news outlets picked up the story. And with each new report, each new theory, each new sighting, the fear grew. But let's talk evidence, not stories, not legends, cold, hard facts that scientists and investigators have documented over the years. Because while most cryptids leave us nothing but blurry photos and questionable footprints, El Chupacabra left bodies. Lots of them. When veterinarians first started examining these carcasses, they noticed something bizarre. The puncture wounds weren't random. They were precise, almost surgical. 2 clean holes, usually on the neck, positioned directly over major blood vessels. No tearing, no signs of struggle. Just those perfect little incisions that would make a phlebotomist jealous. Normal predator attacks are messy. There's blood spatter, signs of a struggle, partially eaten remains. But these kills, completely clean. And I mean completely. When they performed necropsies, they found something that sent chills down their spines. The animals' entire circulatory systems were empty. Not just drained, but vacuum-sealed empty. Dr. Carlos Lopez, a veterinary pathologist who examined several victims in Puerto Rico, put it this way: "In my 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this. Even if you were to deliberately drain an animal's blood, you'd never get it this complete. There's always residual blood in the tissues. But these were like they'd been processed through some kind of machine." The tracks found at attack sites didn't make any sense either. When they could find prints at all, they showed something walking on 2 legs with a stride pattern that didn't match any known predator. A few plaster casts that were made showed feet with strange web-like patterns, not quite reptilian, not quite mammalian. In 2007, researchers finally got what they thought was a break. A rancher in Texas shot what he claimed was a juvenile chupacabra. The body was sent to 3 different labs for DNA testing. The results? Well, that's where this story takes an even stranger turn. The first lab said it was a coyote with an extreme case of mange. Case closed, right? Nope. The second lab found genetic markers they couldn't identify. And the third lab? They refused to release their findings at all. When pressed, all they would say was, "Further testing is needed." Now I know what the skeptics say. This has to be some kind of known predator. Coyotes with mange, feral dogs, maybe even big cats. But here's the problem with that theory. None of those animals can physically do what the chupacabra does. A wolf or a mountain lion, they're gonna leave trauma. They're gonna spill blood. They're gonna eat their prey. According to wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Martinez, no known predator kills this way. Even vampire bats, which actually do feed on blood, only take small amounts from living animals. They can't completely drain their prey. It's just not physically possible with any feeding method we know of. And speaking of those Texas specimens everyone likes to write off as mangy coyotes, let's look at the numbers. The average southern coyote weighs about 30 pounds. But these creatures? Multiple specimens have been weighed at over 120 pounds. That's 4 times the size of a normal coyote. Mange doesn't do that. The really interesting evidence comes from the blood analysis of the victims. In normal predator kills, you find clotting, tissue damage, signs of a struggle. But in suspected Chupacabra attacks, the remaining blood cells show signs of something almost like digestion. Something was breaking down the blood at a cellular level before it was removed from the body. And then there's the timing. These attacks happen fast. We're talking minutes, not hours. In one documented case in Mexico, a farmer heard his goats making noise. By the time he got his boots on and grabbed his rifle, maybe 3 minutes total, 8 animals were already dead. No predator, not even a whole pack of wolves, can kill that efficiently. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence isn't what they found, it's what they didn't find. In thousands of suspected attacks across 2 decades and multiple countries, they've never found a single drop of spilled blood. Not one. So what are we dealing with here? The science says it can't be a known predator. The DNA tests are inconclusive at best, and the physical evidence points to something that kills in a way that defies our understanding of biology. Maybe that's why the scientific community has largely stopped trying to explain it, because sometimes the evidence doesn't lead us to answers, just leads us to bigger, scarier questions. Now, whatever started in Puerto Rico didn't stay there. By 1996, El Chupacabra had become a continental nightmare. And as it spread, it started to change. Miami, Florida was ground zero for the mainland invasion. Police responded to a scene that looked like something out of a horror movie. 69 animals scattered across a single yard. Goats, chickens, geese, ducks, all with those signature puncture wounds, all completely drained of blood. The beast had crossed the Caribbean. But it wasn't done traveling. Reports started pouring in from Mexico, each one more terrifying than the last. In the state of Sinaloa, entire communities stopped sleeping at night. Parents kept their kids indoors. Armed patrols roamed the streets, and still the bodies kept piling up. In Puebla, 30 sheep dead in a single night. The locals formed hunting parties. We're talking hundreds of people armed with machetes, shotguns, anything they could get their hands on. But they never caught it. They just kept finding its victims. As El Chupacabra moved south, the descriptions started changing. In Brazil, witnesses weren't seeing the spiky-backed alien creature from Puerto Rico anymore. They were describing something more primal, a beast with glowing red eyes and a rumbling growl that made their blood run cold. Chile got hit particularly hard. One farmer lost 35 sheep in a single night. But when authorities tried to blame it on wild dogs, the locals weren't buying it. Because dogs don't drain bodies dry, and they definitely don't leave those surgically precise puncture wounds. As the terror spread, each region seemed to add its own flavor to the legend. In Mexico, they said it could hypnotize its prey. That's why nobody ever heard the animals cry out during attacks. In Brazil, they swore it had a gelatinous body that could squeeze through tiny spaces. And in Chile, they started connecting it to UFO activity. Speaking of which, let me tell you about the Atacama incident. The Chilean military spent a suspicious amount of time searching that desert, supposedly looking for something. They even found these weird eggs that didn't match any known species. The government tried to keep it quiet, but word got out. Suddenly, everyone was asking, what exactly are they looking for out there? Some people started wondering if this wasn't just one creature anymore. Maybe we're dealing with a whole species, something that has been hiding in the shadows all along, only now making itself known. After all, how could a single animal be in so many places at once? The scientific community tried to make sense of it all. They pointed to known predators, natural causes, mass hysteria, but they couldn't explain why all these different countries, thousands of miles apart, were reporting the same exact thing. Those puncture wounds, the complete blood loss, the eerie silence of the kills. By the early 2000s, Texas became a hotspot, with ranchers reporting bizarre creatures that look like crosses between wolves and kangaroos. These weren't just stories anymore. They were bringing in bodies, taking pictures, demanding answers. And that's what makes this whole thing so unsettling. Most legends get weaker as they spread, like a game of telephone. But El Chupacabra left a trail of physical evidence across 2 continents. Real bodies, real wounds, real questions that nobody seems able to answer. So maybe the real question isn't how far this thing spread. Maybe we should be asking why it decided to come out of hiding in the first place. And more importantly, what's it gonna do next? So where does El Chupacabra stand today? Well, like any good monster story, it refuses to die. But the modern chapter of this tale might be the strangest one yet. These days, most Chupacabra sightings look pretty different from that spiky alien creature Madeline Tolentino described back in '95. Instead of the sci-fi nightmare with red eyes and spines, people are spotting something that looks more, well, dog-like, but decidedly not your average stray. Here's what makes the modern Chupacabra so fascinating, though. We've got better technology than ever. Everyone's walking around with a high-definition camera in their pockets. We've got thermal imaging, motion sensors, trail cams, yet somehow this thing keeps slipping through our digital nets. The scientific community has pretty much settled on their explanation. It's all misidentified animals, mass hysteria, and good old-fashioned myth-making. They can't explain those early cases in Puerto Rico. You know, the ones with the bloodless bodies and those surgically precise puncture wounds. And that's what keeps this legend alive. Because while Bigfoot and Nessie are all about what might be out there, El Chupacabra left us evidence. Real bodies, real wounds, real questions that still don't have good answers. Maybe that's why nearly 30 years later, farmers in Latin America are still boarding up their barns at night. Why rural communities still trade stories about red eyes in the darkness. Why every few months, somewhere in the Americas, someone finds another strange corpse and whispers that name. El Chupacabra. We might have better cameras and fancier tests these days, but we still can't explain everything that goes bump in the night. Sometimes the more technology we throw at a mystery, the deeper it gets. So the next time you hear something strange outside your window or your dogs start barking at shadows, just remember, El Chupacabra got its start in somebody's backyard. And who knows, maybe it's still out there, still hunting, still waiting to remind us that some legends don't just live in old books. They leave bodies. So what do we make of this blood-drinking beast of Puerto Rico? A monster, mutant, or just another story to keep farmers up at night? I don't know about you, but I'm double-checking my chicken coop locks. You know, just in case. Special note on this episode, there was so much to cover with just the history of the beast itself, we didn't have time to include any real encounters. But do not lament. We will have another episode very soon of nothing but El Chupacabra encounter stories. If you're ready for another dive into the strange and mysterious, click right here. Trust me, you're definitely not going to want to miss this one. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.